Alrighty, we're recording. So welcome to the Lit It Up podcast. I'm Kevin Marchand. And who are you, sir?
I'm Jared Clough.
All right, we are recent graduates of Roger Williams University in Bristol, Rhode Island, and I'm now pursuing a Master's of Art in English Literature. And Jared, you want to talk about yourself for a minute?
So I graduated from Roger Williams as well with a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Creative Writing. I just recently got my first real job after college, working for a youth center in Northfield, a couple towns over. So that's what I'm up to.
How far is that commute?
12 minutes.
Oh, nice. Not bad. All right, so for yeah, nice. So for episode 1 here, we what we think that this podcast is going to be. The name might change, but we are going to aim to read one book a month and then just talk about that book and whatever else comes to mind and try and keep our crappy generation interested in literature because it's pretty important and no one seems to give a shit about it. So we're gonna read old books, we'll read contemporary books. We really won't know from month to month, but the first book we did is The Stranger by Albert Camus. And the version we read was translated from the French by Matthew Ward, which I think is the version in English that everyone reads. So I guess I'll just start off. What did you think of the book? I've read it before. I read it as a senior in high school, and I wrote an essay about it, and I understood none of it. But I just was into philosophy and wanted to look tough, so I read it, and then when I wrote my paper, my teacher said, "Yeah, you have no idea what you're talking about, do you?" And I said, "No, I don't." But I enjoyed it, so I thought Jared would enjoy it. So what do you think?
I really did enjoy it. I mean, it was the first time I read it. I wanted to read it twice before this podcast, but I was only able to read it once.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'll say about it that really struck me was trying to put yourself in the shoes of a main character that is just it's a very different way of thinking. That he the way he lives is just very different than the way I live. And whenever you read a book, you want to put yourself into the main character's shoes to really understand his perspective, especially if it's first person. And you try to do that with everyone in the story, but obviously if it's first person, you're going to relate to the main character the most.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a bit of a challenge, but I think there's a lot for us to talk about. I mean, there's so many things with decisions that happen in the book, the way that the plot moved forward, that I think it's very easy to have a debate over these simple things that happen in the story.
I'm interested to see if we feel differently about it, because had you heard of Camus or read anything by Camus before this?
No, I did not.
No, all right, yeah, so this will be good, because I have a sort of entrenched position about the subject at this point, so it'll be interesting to see if we disagree, which would be great. So let's just start with those first 2 sentences of the book. You said it was tough to relate to him. He says, "Mammon died today." And Mammon, he means mom. I don't know if it's actually pronounced Mammon. Might actually be that. But Mammon died today. Or yesterday, maybe. I don't know. So right there, you're like, what? You know, so your mom died today or yesterday, maybe. I mean, I guess you could look at it charitably and think maybe he's been so distraught over the last day that he doesn't know if like a day has passed or not, but you learn pretty quickly that that's actually not the case at all. He's just going about his normal life and he's not overly affected by his mom's death.
Yeah, immediately it sounds passive right off the bat. Right off the bat, you get a sense of someone died, and it doesn't sound like I care that much.
Yeah.
And you're sitting there and you're thinking, well, let me give him a chance. Let me see. Well, let me just dig deeper into who he is, understand this guy. But right off the bat, Camus is really establishing the role of this character and who he is right off the bat. He's very passive.
And so we may assume and give him a little more of the benefit of the doubt that maybe he had a terrible relationship with his mom, or they just didn't get along, but we learned pretty early on that that wasn't the case. And I can't find the exact quote, but he pretty much says, well, we see what happens in the first chapter, that he just goes about his normal life. He goes to the restaurant that he always eats at for lunch, and then he meets up with his girlfriend and goes swimming, and she comes back to the house, And by the end of the first chapter, you're really like, what is going on here? Because he doesn't seem to care. And then eventually he makes his way to her funeral, and he's asked, there's a woman, but this is an image that struck me from the funeral. There's a woman crying at the funeral, and Marcel doesn't know her because his mom, he sent her away to basically an old person's home. He says because he didn't have the money to support her. And the other reason he says is because they didn't have anything to say to each other anymore, which is a very interesting line, which doesn't exactly mean that they hated each other. It could just mean he's blatantly honest and they always have that relationship where we just have nothing to say to each other anymore. But it's definitely suspect from the beginning. Yeah. It's that his motives are definitely suspect.
He's very distant from his emotions. So like the lady crying at the funeral, he almost looks at her and he doesn't quite understand why she would be crying. Yep. He's almost like, oh, you're at my mom's funeral. Why are you crying about this?
Yeah.
And it's almost just like the caretaker is the one who has to explain to him, oh, well, you see people who are upset. They were very close.
Yeah.
Like, your mom was her only friend, and now she's gone. And there's also Perez, Thomas Perez.
Yeah.
I forget his name.
Yeah, something.
Gentlemen.
Yeah.
As they're talking, about to go to the.
Well, before we talk about Perez, we'll go right to him. But the line I pulled out of there about that woman who was crying. Marcel says in first person, then finally she shut up.
Right?
Yeah. so not only
it was annoying, as if it was annoying him that someone was crying the death of his mom.
And so this is where we start to find out even more about Marcel. We realize that he's not even actually. So he struck us as strange from the beginning, but what we realize now is that he is totally driven by his physical state. He's sitting in the funeral and he's talking about how hot he is and how uncomfortable he is. And when he says, then finally she shut up, it's because her crying was annoying him. And to him, that was the biggest problem with his day. Not that he was at his mom's funeral, but that he was having his physical comfort sort of shattered by other people and by the weather and by everything else. So now talk about Perez and who this guy was.
Yeah, well, Perez, from what we get from him immediately, Marcel, how do you pronounce his name?
Marcel, I think.
Marcel.
Yeah.
Marcel. Yeah. So he recognizes Perez. He was a face back when he was growing up, someone from the past where he didn't know him personally, but he recognized him. And are they walking the casket? Is that what's going on? They're kind of walking the casket.
I think they're walking from like the wake to the funeral with the casket. Yeah. Like, it was all very sort of informal, but
I'm people, and of course, right behind the casket is Marcel, because he's her daughter. So you have families first, but trailing at the end of the line is Perez, and from what we get from Perez, he has a limp. He seems to be struggling. It's very hot out. That's, like you said, Marcel is very conscious of his physical environment, and the sun definitely has an effect in this scene.
He said
that's a huge image. The sun is a very big image in this scene.
Repeatedly, throughout the novel, too. And he says as they're walking the casket, the glare from the sky was unbearable. So even that word, unbearable, like the glare from the sky was unbearable. That's a little much. Like, what was unbearable about it? I mean, yeah, maybe you might need a pair of sunglasses or it's obnoxious or something, but unbearable? That's it, when you're at your mother's funeral? Unbearable? That's a strong word.
It sounds like it's a sunny day.
Yeah, it sounds like a nice day.
Most cases is related to positivity. Most people would say it's a beautiful day. This is a positive thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the stereotype of the sunny days, but that's kind of Camus saying my main character is when he sees sunny days, he feels the heat, and if it's unbearable, then he's not quite enjoying walking around.
Right.
Because he physically just feels hot. He's not about the sunny day stereotype.
Yeah. Damn, and maybe just to close out the funeral, I got one more quote from Marcel that just packages this little argument we've made. On page 16, packages it up nice and tight. Someone asked him, is that your mother in there? Again, I said yes. Was she old? I answered fairly, because I didn't know the exact number.
Yeah. That shows more about his character with his mother. What his relationship with his mom shows you a lot more about that. But then he also says at the end of the chapter, that one of the last few sentences, he says, then there was the church and the villagers on the sidewalks, the red geraniums on the graves in the cemetery. Perez fainted. He crumpled like a rag doll. The blood-red earth spilling over Maman's casket, the white flesh of the roots mixed in with it, the more people, voices, the village waiting in front of a cafe, the incident drone of the motor. The sentence keeps going on, but what I wanted to clarify was he just glazed over the fact that an old man who was struggling with a limp from day one and who continued to walk because of his love for this woman, just fainted, which could be very severe for an old man. And he just glazes over it, and the only detail he gives about it is that his body crumpled down like a rag doll.
Yeah.
And he's like, he fainted. He looked like a rag doll when he fainted. End of story. That's all I saw. That's physically all it meant to me.
And then his conclusion.
That even his, you go.
Yeah, his conclusion to the day. I knew I was going to go to bed and sleep for 12 hours. That's his concern. Again, it's just the physical comfort. It's the I'm drained. The sun was shining on me all day. Screw Perez. Screw my mom. I need to sleep for 12 hours. That's what worries me. And the one thing I would say we didn't touch on is I'm pretty sure he was the first one to leave the funeral. Like he didn't even. They asked him like, "Would you like to pay your last respects?" And he was just like, "Nah, I'm good." And he just left.
No, yeah.
Yeah, he didn't even pay last respects.
And it's, I think what's important to mention is it's not a negative perspective that he's giving out. He's not like complaining about Perez. He's not complaining about his mom. He's not saying anything negative. He's just extremely passive. He just doesn't care. He sees everything around him and he just says to himself, it really doesn't mean much to me. Like I see these things and they just don't matter, really.
Exactly.
When I think of my everyday, this means nothing, and I just can't quite emotionally connect to it. I can't quite feel like for other people because truthfully, it just I'm just living. That's it.
He basically just describes everything. He doesn't explain anything. Or there's no explanation. It's really just a straight description of the way the world seems to be to him.
That's all it is. It's just images passing by him.
Although,
that's all it is.
This is what makes it strange. I agree with that 100%. But so these serious things seem to not affect him in any way whatsoever. But then before he went to the funeral, he had to ask his boss for a few days off. And he makes a note of something to the effect of he seemed annoyed or whatever, and I wish I hadn't annoyed him. There's like, in that we'll probably hit a few more of those in the book. There's these little things that don't matter at all, but he gets not upset, but he regrets sort of the fact when he makes people either feel uncomfortable or upsets them or something, because he probably just assumes everyone's the same as him and cares only about their immediate physical experience. And it's like, oh, you annoyed me? That's like the worst part of my day, like the glaring sun. But it's like for his boss, he was probably like, forgot about it 2 minutes later.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. One of the few things he seems to worry about is his boss's perception of him. And that, to me, that's interesting because throughout the book, and we're going to keep talking about this, like he doesn't really have much concern about his personal image in society, about how he's viewed in front of the eyes of others. But you're right, with his boss, he's probably the guy he cares about the most in a way, at least in part one. at least in part 1 of the story, when he thinks of like, who do I not want to disappoint, his boss is definitely the one guy, even more than Marie, who we'll start talking about in chapter 2.
Right. So this just struck me as funny, and it goes right along with what we were just saying. The beginning of chapter 2. As I was waking up, it came to me why my boss had seemed annoyed when I asked him for 2 days off. Today is Saturday. It's like, this guy is just, in like, it seems too simplistic to talk about it this way, but in one sense, he's just out of it. Like, he's just not at all, like, engaged with life. What, he just realized that he asked his boss for 2 days off, and what he asked off for was the weekend?
Yeah.
And again,
Yeah,
even that's the first thing he thinks of when he wakes up the day after he buried his mom. There's no mention of, oh wait, no, later on in the paragraph. But in the first place, it isn't my fault if they buried Mammon yesterday instead of today. So even there, when he's thinking about how his boss is thinking about him, he's worried about whether his boss is going to see fault in him and whether he can be blamed in any way for the fact that the funeral was on Friday. It's no, damn, I really buried Mammon yesterday. It's, no, he can't blame me for that. Just they had the funeral on Friday. It's not my fault. It's all very strange. So we'll move through his Sunday a little bit, because today is Saturday, but chapter 2 covers Saturday and Sunday, and this is where Marie comes into it. So do you want to talk about this chapter for a little bit? Bring up whatever you saw of
Marie,
concern.
He meets Marie on Saturday. They go see a movie, and then at night he just kind of glazes over it, but clearly they hook up.
Yeah. Like,
clearly he had a very enjoyable time with her, not even just what happened later on that night, but throughout the day, it seems like kind of one of his, like one of the more positive times. Seems like he's having fun. Like, you didn't even see how he glazes over it, though. Toward the end of the show, I gave her a kiss, but not a good one. She came back to my place. Next paragraph. When I woke up, Marie had gone. She explained to me that she had to go to her aunt's. I remembered that it was Sunday, and that didn't bother me. I don't like Sundays. So, immediately, it's almost as if it's completely physical. Like, his environment, his physical environment is everything he's telling you. The sentences are short, the way Camus is writing this.
Yep. And
he doesn't really go into much depth. For example, I feel with long sentences, a lot of times you explain what's going on, and then they also try to talk about the thoughts that are going behind those actions. Characters try to maybe justify the way they are thinking, or they maybe try to let you inside their head. That's not the case in this book. In this book, he's just saying, all the main character wants you to know is, this is what is going on in my day. This is what's going on. This happened. Gave Marie a kiss. She came over. Woke up the next morning. She was gone. And it's very physical imagery. But in terms of the thoughts and the processes behind it and what's actually, creating those sentences, you don't really get to know that person that much at all.
So then, in a sense, I agree with that. We're almost forced to become like him, because now we're perceiving the world in the same way that he is, with no explanation, just straight, what do I see, what do I feel? That's it. And no explanation of anything.
It's almost like reading a serious document, something like a police report, where if I was an officer and I just want to know the facts and what happened, I would read something along the lines of this. I would read like just very factual, very action-based sentences.
Yeah.
This is what happened.
So, I mean, later on, I don't know, well, we'll get to it in chapter 5, I think, but later on, when shit hits the fan, I had a bad feeling right away, even the first time I read it, because, like you said, this is basically a police report. There's no sort of daylight here for presumed innocence or anything. I mean, because he just tells you exactly what happened. He doesn't, there's no trying to shade the truth. Like, even in chapter 3, we'll start to see how he starts to move towards the crime because he just gets pulled along by this flow of existence where he makes these decisions that he says, like on page 24, that he says don't really matter, because this is what he says to close out this chapter. It occurred to me that anyway, one more Sunday was over, that Mammon was buried now, that I was going back to work, and that really nothing had changed. Nothing had changed? His mom's dead.
Yeah.
Very strange.
That right there, in a nutshell, just tells you about his relationship with his mom.
Yeah.
It really meant nothing in his life. She was not a consistent person in his life, and having her gone really did not change his lifestyle or who he was whatsoever.
But then we'll start to see, though, that it's not just his mom, though. It's everybody. Even Marie, who he just had this great day with. Maybe we'll move along some of the plot here, because chapter 3 is really quick, and that's just where he meets Raymond and Salamano, I think his name is, and like that was strange also, because Salamano is this old guy who just has a dog, a really mangy dog, and he's constantly beating him if he like runs too fast and beating him if he runs too slow, but yet he seems to be that dog seems to be the only presence that he has in his life. So that's sort of the way I took that, at least in the beginning, is Marcel lives this very disconnected existence where he has no actual relationships with anyone besides Marie, who's just physical. Whereas this dog and this guy, they like grind each other down, but like they're actually connecting in some weird way, and like they're like showing the brutality of relationships. Like when you're really going to connect with somebody, you're gonna beat the shit out of them once in a while because you're just pissing each other off so bad, whereas Marcel just is putting the hand up to everybody. I'm not going to tell you how I'm feeling. I don't want to know how you're feeling, blah, blah, blah. All that. Yeah.
It's almost, I don't even think it's that far. I don't even think he's saying, I'm not going to tell you what I'm feeling. I think he's not feeling anything.
That's right, Maria.
I think he's hearing this, and he doesn't care. You got a guy who, Raymond's saying, my girl cheated on me. I really want to get her good, but, I hit her sometimes. And he's expressing to him everything. He's expressing, this is exactly how my relationship works, and it's gone bad. And I really want to get my girl really bad, and you need to write me a letter. Write a letter if you don't mind. And Raymond is not even being forceful here.
No.
This chapter is exactly where Marcel starts going downhill.
This is the first step,
it's because he's not. The big thing with me is it doesn't seem like Marcel has any morals. He seems to lack right from wrong. He doesn't seem to care about what is right or what is wrong. And granted, I'm all about the philosophical debate of what is right, what is wrong. But you see later on in this book where if you have not established right from wrong, you could very easily fall in a situation where, because you had no establishment of wrong, you fall anywhere, dude.
Yeah, you're doing it. Yeah, because you don't know what wrong is, you're doing it. Like so what I think you're saying is like. What I think you're saying is he doesn't even need to have a set of principles that align with yours or an objective set or anything. He just has no set of principles. So, and like that is, yeah. And that's, in other things that I've read about this, that's what a lot of people say, is that they say that he's neither a moral or an immoral man. So we can talk about that later, if that's what it means to be a stranger or not. But like, that's quite the claim, because like if you have no set of principles, does that make you a neutral man, or does that make you an immoral man? If you're going to then be tempted by the wrong.
Yeah, and I believe it's all about a balance. It's okay to be neutral in certain situations, but we're going to get more into that. I think that's a big discussion as this book goes on. But one thing I do want to mention about chapter 3.
Okay.
I always try to look into every character and say, what is their purpose? what is the importance here? And Salamano is a really interesting character because he doesn't have a pivotal role in how the story moves forward, in terms of what happens to Marcel.
Yeah.
But if you look at his dog, I mean, his dog would walk faster than Salamano, and Salamano would beat him. And then the dog stops walking to the point where Salamano passes him, and then Salamano beats him for that. And if you're that dog, you also have a very confusing idea of what is right, what is wrong.
That's a really great connection. I like that.
Because that dog is just walking every day, and in many ways, what is a dog concerned about is the physical imagery of what's going on around him. In many ways, I mean, I'm not going to say Marcel his life is somewhat reflective with the dog's life, because it's very different. I'm not going to make that connection. But when you look at the characters that Camus is putting into this book, you have to ask yourself, why is the dog in there? That dog is confused, and he's having moral issues because he does not quite understand his owner, the purpose of exactly what he's supposed to do.
That's a really good point. And so maybe he's confused, but maybe also at one point he decides, hey, I'm going to get beat either way, so I'm just going to walk fast when I feel like it, and I'm just going to walk slow when I feel like it, and I'm going to get beat either way. And that's kind of exactly what Marcel does in life too. I'm going to go sleep for 12 hours when I want. I'm going to tell that or wish that lady would shut up when I want to. I'm going to do whatever I want because no matter what, I'm going to die. And we'll get into that more, and that seems to be what's driving Marcel is, of course, that existential dread, because he's shed religion and he's shed all sorts of philosophical...
We'll get into that much more during part 2. Once part 2 gets going, we'll definitely touch on that.
Definitely. Okay, so chapter 4 is where Salamano's dog takes off. And it's also where the cops come and basically arrest Raymond, or pretend to, for beating his girlfriend. Do you have anything you want to say about that one? Because to me, I think we're kind of just moving into part 2 here, because I mean those were sort of sideshow issues that don't mean much, I don't think, to Marcel's development.
One, it definitely is a sideshow chapter. It's it's just like another chapter moving forward. But some big things that happened was Marie also came over, and Marie was saying,
Oh, yeah. Oh, how did I miss this?
A minute later, she asked me if I loved her.
What page is this?
This is page 35.
Oh, yeah.
She asked me if I loved her. I told her it didn't mean anything, but I didn't think so. She looked sad. But as we were fixing lunch, and for no apparent reason, she laughed in such a way that I kissed her. It was then that we heard what sounded like a fight break out in Raymond's room.
Yeah.
So that tells you a lot about... I think this character is so distant from his emotions that it tells you a lot about what's going on with him and Marie. She's a positive influence in his life, and he really enjoys his time with her. But there still does not seem to be much emotion there whatsoever.
Yeah, that was sort of the line I was thinking of when you were talking about how it was before we found out a lot about his relationship with his mom based on the way he acted, and that's why I was saying it's almost like that with everybody. Because even Marie, the one person he has a positive relationship with, can't even tell her he loves her, because he honestly, the concept of love means nothing to him. Honestly. Yeah. Like, he honestly just doesn't care. And yeah. And later on, we'll get to this, but later on when he's in prison, it really clarifies that even more, because you get the sense, even right here, that he enjoys her for her body, and so that he can kiss her and swim with her and touch her, but you get the feeling almost that any woman would suffice. Like, it doesn't matter that it's her. Like, anyone he could call Marie if they're willing to swim with him and laugh in such a way that makes him want to kiss them.
he even says, Marie asks him, literally, she says to him, if I was just another woman, would you love me then, or would you like me just as much as you like me now? And he said, probably.
Yeah, he did. He
even admits to her that, like, yeah, if it was any other woman, I probably would be just as happy. And I think that also touches on a feminist lens in this book as well. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what time frame this story is being taken place.
I think it's supposed to be right around the time that Camus is writing, which would be like the 1940s.
So in that time, I mean, you got to think about Marie's actions here. Marie meets a guy. She goes to a movie with him. By the third date, she's asking do you love me? It's not even much later on. It's maybe 1 or 2 days later where she actually is saying, would you marry me?
Yeah.
So you get a sense that she's clearly, the American dream wife who's looking to,
settle down,
marry a man, settle down.
And he has a good job. He would provide. Yeah. And
clearly, one thing that also interested me is that when the fight breaks out in Raymond's room, you can get the sense that Marie is disgusted by what's going on and that she does not respect what Raymond's doing. But that doesn't change Marchal's actions.
No.
He doesn't care about how she feels. And you really get the sense that it's a man's world. You get a sense that, Raymond gets off the charges. What happened? Like, it's like not even, it was a warning. They gave him a warning.
Yeah, basically, Marchand basically just went and testified, and he ended up just getting a warning.
Yeah, so, he got a warning after Marchand went in and said, well, she cheated on him.
Yeah, exactly.
And so then he gets off with a warning, as if that's an excuse to hit a woman. And that shows you that in that society, this clearly is a male-driven society. So that's going to also affect how we have to look at his relationship with Marie.
Definitely.
And possibly even his mom.
Yep.
Even his mom. There's a good chance that his mom was your typical mom at the time who just stayed home and cleaned and took care of the kids. And when Marchand grew up, he maybe didn't need that mom anymore.
Yep.
And at that point, she meant nothing. And I think that might tell you a lot about, what his relationship to the women in his life were.
I would agree. Because then it almost provides truth to his statement that they had nothing to say to each other anymore. Because he really just didn't have anything to say to her. She was his mom who took care of him when he was younger, and now what was she? Yeah. So Raymond's getting off. Now we're on to chapter 5. Raymond's getting off for beating his girlfriend is actually what sets the rest of the story in motion, because it says on page 40, Raymond had been followed all day by a group of Arabs, one of whom was the brother of his former mistress, who was the woman that he was beating. And so this is how Marchand starts to get dragged into the mud a little bit more here, because first he wrote the letter for Raymond. Then he went and testified to get him off that the girl was cheating on him. And now Raymond isn't saying like, hey, come with me, we're going to go beat up these Arabs. But he does invite him to a friend's house on the beach. And when they're going there, Marie goes too. And when they're going there, they see the Arabs on the other side of the street basically gawking at them and getting ready to pursue them, quite obviously. And in none of these situations does Marchand think, maybe this has nothing to do with me and I should not get involved in this, because he actually, in that moment, nothing bad is happening to him, so he's not in any way driven to take steps to alleviate the situation, because to him there is no situation yet, because he's perfectly comfortable at the moment. So then slowly he just starts getting pulled more and more into here. So let's move now to when they're at the
well, it's also it's important to note too that all the favors that he was doing for Raymond at the time, those were premeditated. Raymond asked him, can you write me a letter? And he said yes. And then Marchand put his thoughts on paper. That's evidence.
Yeah.
He went to a police station and testified. That is a police report of evidence with his name on it.
It's so crazy.
When you later on, when we were sitting in the courtroom, what the events that we're about to talk about right now, what happened in chapter 5, it seemed like it came out of the blue. But when you start to look at all this on paper, you understand how the court situation, how the court case really got handled the way it did, because that's exactly how it looked on paper. It did not look like this was something he walked into. He had been helping Raymond out, providing evidence of his, of him advocating for Raymond multiple times.
That's true.
About the same issue at hand. So it really shows you that Marcel is getting into a situation. He got into this situation the second he wrote that letter. The second he put that evidence down, he's already in the mud. He's ankle deep.
That's true.
At this point on the beach, he's probably up to his thighs right now. Yeah. He's probably like barely able to move in mud right now. Like he's deep in it. So you carry on.
I would agree, and still because he's so disconnected from life, he's that fact is not at all apparent to him. Like we can see as the reader that he's already knee deep. To him, there is no mud. Like what mud? Like there even if there was mud, he wouldn't care. Literally, he wouldn't care. Maybe he would keep the sun out of his eyes.
Yeah. No, exactly.
So I have a pretty. Go ahead. You go ahead. You go ahead.
Okay.
Did you have something about the mud?
I don't have any other. It's more of repetition of what we're talking about, so it's nothing new.
Okay. So I think chapter 6 is where they actually go to the beach house. Chapter 6 because that's the last chapter of part 1. So unless you have anything from part 5, I just had one poignant line on page 45. He said, near the bottom, "I still don't know why, but I said that until then I hadn't realized that people thought badly of me for doing it, but that the home had seemed like the natural thing since I didn't have enough money to have Mammon cared for." So again, that's that same line. He isn't so much concerned with whether or not it was the right thing to put Mammon in an old person's home. He's concerned with the fact that I hadn't realized until then that people thought badly of me for doing it. And even in that situation, it's not like, oh, damn, people feel bad for me. It's just a blatant acknowledgement of a fact. It's like, oh, people think bad of me for doing it. There's still no indication that he really cares one way or the other. So he's not driven by people's perception of him. He's not driven by what Mammon might care about. He's not driven by anything.
And one thing that is interesting, though, is that someone who does care about their social image a lot is Raymond.
That's true.
Raymond asks him multiple times. He tells him the story at the beginning when we first meet Raymond. I hit my girlfriend because she cheated on me. What do you think about that?
Yeah.
He's being blatantly honest, and he's asking him, what do you think? He actually wants to know Marcel's perspective here. And this is where having a set of morals, or at least a social scope of where your actions fall compared to other people's actions, that's when I would help you. Yeah. But because Marcel does not have that, he really he doesn't care.
Because he basically, if I remember right, his response is basically that he doesn't think it's any of his business. Like, he basically doesn't have a judgment one way or the other.
Yeah, he doesn't have anything to say. He's like, honestly, like, whatever, whatever.
Yeah.
Marcel is just a big whatever. He's like Mr. Whatever. If something happens,
whatever,
he's like,
man.
Whatever.
Yeah.
Like, so, I mean, that is key, because you have a chance. Raymond gives him a chance to establish where he stands on this situation.
Definitely.
He gives him a chance to back out. If Marcel said, I don't respect you for that.
Because that was even before the letters. Yeah, that was before everything. He could have stopped it right then.
That was when Raymond was just introduced in his life, where he really got to know who he was, like on a personal level.
Yeah.
And Raymond gave him a chance to run if you don't like who I am.
Which became obvious
Marcel
pretty quick.
Didn't care.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm going to go back to a big statement. Silence is compliance. If you're saying to someone that I have nothing to say when they tell you something like that. And if you have no problem with it, if you're not against them, you're with them. So therefore, Marcel, by kind of going with it after hearing Raymond's actions, that's actually saying that he agrees with those actions, he stands by him, and he actually supports Raymond in what he's doing.
Right.
Because he's not speaking out against it. He's complying with it.
Right.
Entirely.
And I'm pretty sure just visually, when they start that conversation, they're standing just in the hallway at the apartment, and then he invites them in and then writes the letter. So it's not, he doesn't say anything passing judgment one way or the other, but he clearly doesn't care enough or condones it because he lets him into his apartment and then helps him out. So It's crazy. Do you want to take us through chapter 6, through the climax, if you will?
Well, why don't you do it? Because most of the quotes I've highlighted, I started highlighting them during part 2. So
okay.
Right now I don't have any quotes that I'm jumping to right off the bat. So why don't you do it?
Okay. So like I said before, they are on their way to this beach house, which is a friend that hasn't entered the picture yet, but it's one of Raymond's friends. And Marie and Raymond and Marcel are all going. And as I said, the Arabs were sort of standing on the other side of the street. They got on the bus, and then it says on page 48, we headed toward the bus stop. So they're not on the bus yet. We headed toward the bus stop, which wasn't far, and Raymond said that the Arabs weren't following us. I turned around. So they keep being these hints that something's going to happen with these Arabs. It's dropping so many hints that the main showdown is coming up. So then they're at the beach, and we walked on the beach for a long time, and here's another line from Marcel. By now the sun was overpowering. Just same as, basically you could just switch that word out for unbearable. Just another moment where he can't deal with the sun. And what happens, basically, I won't go through every line because I didn't mark it down perfectly, but basically him, Raymond, Marie, maybe even the guy whose beach house it is, are walking, and they have an altercation with the Arabs. The Arabs come up, and basically Raymond beats the shit out of one of them, and one of them, I'm pretty sure, doesn't break Raymond's nose or something, but bloodies him up, and he had a knife, and he cuts open his arm a little bit. So it almost seems, the first time you read it, like that is the main showdown, and then you're like, oh, that was weird. Marcel didn't even take part in it. Didn't even do anything. And you just kind of watched, and then they left. But then what happens is, and this is where, like you say, he's already knee-deep in the mud, but so you make that, there's that question of, free will versus determinism. It's like, is he just on this downward staircase where each step is bringing him, and sealing his fate a little bit more? Maybe, and maybe you could make that argument that he's just on this flow of life that's pulling him toward this, but they get back to the house, the beach house, and everyone goes inside, and Marcel says, I'm just going to go walk back down the beach.
You gotta remember, Raymond comes back. Raymond gets injured. He goes to get healed.
Yeah.
Comes back. And then him and Raymond go for a walk by themselves.
Oh, right. There's the 3 times. Yeah. Okay.
Because
this time Raymond has a gun.
And this is key, because when they see the Arabs, they go to this spot where it's not so sunny and there's shade.
Yeah.
And it's very relaxing. But the 2 Arab men are there. And there's this staring of there's no beef. The Arabs, we did our business with you. They didn't say anything, but they clearly aren't standing up with any intentions to be aggressive.
No.
And what happens is Marcel is able to talk to Raymond. Raymond's thinking about grabbing his gun, and Marcel is able to talk him out of it and to actually give Marcel his gun.
Yeah.
So now we have Marcel walking around with a very deadly weapon. It's now in his possession. Now it's there. And you're sitting there and you're just thinking and so they walk back. So you can take it from there. So they walk back.
Yeah.
They walk back to the house.
Yeah. Let me find the exact page where that happens. Because I kind of want to just read through a few pages to the end of this because it's so mind-boggling.
Yeah,
so first,
as you look for that page, there is one thing I wanted to mention.
Go for it.
About page 50, he's talking about being at the beach with Marie earlier that day, and he says, he's talking about Mason, a friend of Raymond's.
Yeah, the guy
he told me that he spent his Saturdays and Sundays and all of his days off there. With my wife, of course, he added. Just then his wife was laughing with Marie. For the first time, maybe, I really thought I was going to get married. Now, he doesn't say for the first time I wanted to get married, or for the first time I was excited, or that I could see myself getting married. He was saying for the first time I think I'm getting married. Almost to say she really likes me, and she clearly is likes the situation of being a wife, and I guess it's happening. But one thing that's really important to note here is that as Marcel moves forward, Marie is clearly showing signs of affection, and he clearly enjoys his time with Marie. But because he is not a man of morals, he doesn't even acknowledge that as a good thing.
No.
It's not even that he doesn't even ignore the wrong. He can't even comprehend what's good.
Right.
And because he has something good to hang on to, he has nothing to lose. And therefore, when he falls in this situation, I mean, if he really cared about getting married to Marie and felt as if that he had a future with a woman that cared about him, and he was going to get married, and if he really cared about that, I don't think he would have done exactly what he's about to do.
No, he wouldn't have.
Chapter.
Yeah, wouldn't have even put himself in that situation in the first place. But yeah, that's such a good point, because that day at the beach, I'm pretty sure him and Marie, they go on a swim that's very sort of sensual. There is even a hint that they might have had sex in the water and stuff. They are just enjoying one another's company. And then that line that you talked about, it's the good life is just flashing in front of his face, but it looks the same to him as everything else, because he just has no judgment about anything. So, okay. So Raymond goes back I'll pick up here on page 57. 56, actually. I went with him as far as the bungalow, and as he climbed the wooden steps, I just stood there at the bottom, my head ringing from the sun, unable to face the effort it would take to climb the wooden staircase and face the women again. But the heat was so intense that it was just as bad as standing still in the blinding stream falling from the sky. To stay or to go, it amounted to the same thing. And the funny thing is, no, it doesn't. But to him, it does. But of course it doesn't. So a minute later, I turned back toward the beach and started walking. There was the same dazzling red glare. The sea gasped for air with each shallow, stifled little wave that broke on the sand. I was walking slowly toward the rocks, and I could feel my forehead swelling under the sun. Literally, every 2 lines, he's talking about how unbearable the sun is. All that heat was pressing down on me and making it hard for me to go on. And every time I felt the blast of its hot breath strike my face, I gritted my teeth, clenched my fists in my trouser pockets, and strained every nerve in order to overcome the sun and the thick drunkenness that was spilling over me. With every blade of light that flashed off the sand, from a bleached shell or a piece of broken glass, my jaws tightened. I walked for a long time. And then he sees Raymond's Arab, which is what he calls the guy who is the brother of the girl that Raymond was beating. He was alone. He was lying on his back with his hands behind his head, his forehead in the shade of the rock, the rest of his body in the sun. His blue overalls seemed to be steaming in the heat. I was a little surprised. As far as I was concerned, the whole thing was over, and I'd gone there without even thinking about it. That's a very strange line, too. As far as I was concerned...
Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, exactly. If I'm the Arab and I'm chilling on a beach, the Arab's just laying down. So he's chilling. He's relaxing. He's probably thinking, as far as I'm concerned, things are over. Exactly. I have no beef. There's no reason for me to stand up. Yet you got this guy who you did see a gun being handed to him, and you see that he's back,
basically standing over you.
Today. If anyone's to say, "Oh, as far as I'm concerned, it's over," it's definitely not Marchand. Marchand is, at this point, on paper, it looks like he's actually pursuing this Arab.
Right.
With a loaded weapon.
Exactly. Oh my God. So, as soon as he saw me, he sat up a little and put his hand in his pocket. Naturally, I gripped Raymond's gun inside my jacket, naturally. Then he lay back again, but without taking his hand out of his pocket. I was pretty far away from him, about 10 meters or so. I could tell he was glancing at me now and then through half-closed eyes, but most of the time, he was just a form shimmering before my eyes in the fiery air. The sound of the waves was even lazier, more drawn out than at noon. It was the same sun, the same light, still shining on the same sand as before. Why is all this relevant? Not. For 2 hours the day had stood still. For 2 hours it had been anchored in a sea of molten lead. It's aggressive. On the horizon, a tiny steamer went by. I made out the black dot from the corner of my eye because I hadn't stopped watching the Arab. So he's like grilling this guy. It occurred to me that all I had to do was turn around, and that would be the end of it. But the whole beach, throbbing in the sun, was pressing at my back. And I really want us to pay attention to this last page, because this is like what's going to set up part 2, because we talked about how he's neither the moral or the immoral man, and he clearly didn't have principles. But right now, just in this one instance, to me, all this talk about the sun is just sounding like he's already making excuses. He's saying, but the whole beach throbbing in the sun was pressing on my back. Like, what does that mean? The sun was pressing on your back? Yeah. Like, your back was hot? Like, what does that have to do with why you're about to do this?
A good connection might be, I mean, in chapter 1, we see the sun had a huge overbearing effect.
Yeah.
On
unbearable effect.
You know, maybe the sun is his excuse to cover up his emotions. Maybe at his mom's funeral, he actually was sad. But instead of saying, I'm sad, he said, it's really hot out. And maybe in this scene, he really is angry at the guy. But instead of saying, I actually felt angry, he's saying it was really hot out. It was
that's
also
possible, yeah.
hot out when he was swimming with Marie, but he wasn't upset. His emotions were good.
Yeah. So
maybe there are emotions backed up here, and he's using the weather and as this giant cover-up for it. That's obviously an assumption, I think, so far. I'd have to really read this book more, but it does seem that his actions during these moments with the sun they're definitely, I don't know, they don't quite make sense. He almost talks as if he's innocent, but it's not backing it up whatsoever. He doesn't sound innocent whatsoever.
Definitely. Like you said, I mean, we can't prove it one way or another. That's like a straight psychoanalytic point of view of looking at it, but it definitely seems reasonable. I mean, it definitely feels that way a little bit.
It feels premeditated, too. I mean, he left a bungalow to walk back to that beach, and his excuse is the sun.
And that he couldn't face the women.
What if we played devil's advocate and just said, what if you did premeditate and actually want to go out and kill that dude?
Yeah.
And what if that entire time when you're walking over, everything you're saying here is bullshit, and you're really over there to kill a man? I mean, the guy raises. You can keep reading because like you're getting to the good stuff.
Yeah. So this is like that question that you're furious about right now is like this is what's gonna really illuminate that, because so now I'll skip ahead a little bit because the Arab stands up, pulls out his knife. The light shot off the steel, and it was a long, flashing blade cutting at my forehead. At the same instant, the sweat in my eyebrows dripped down over my eyelids all at once and covered them with a warm, thick film. My eyes were blinded behind the curtain of tears and salt. All I could feel were the symbols of sunlight crashing on my forehead, and indistinctly the dazzling spear flying up from the knife in front of me. The scorching blade slashed at my eyelashes and stabbed at my stinging eyes. He's not talking about the knife. The Arab hasn't done anything. He's talking about the light off the knife like a psycho. That's when everything began to reel. The sea carried up a thick, fiery breath. It seemed to me as if the sky split open from one end to the other to rain down fire. My whole being tensed, and I squeezed my hand around the revolver. The trigger gave. I felt the smooth underside of the butt. And there, in that noise, sharp and deafening at the same time, is where it all started. I shook off the sweat and sun. I knew that I had shattered the harmony of the day, the exceptional silence of a beach where I'd been happy. Then I fired 4 more times at the motionless body, where the bullets lodged without leaving a trace. And it was like knocking 4 quick times on the door of unhappiness.
So now he's talking about emotions.
Yes,
now
all of a sudden, happy and unhappiness.
Like, he's actually touching upon feelings here. And, you know, what's crazy about the knife is that I think he's using the sun as a way of saying, this guy holds up a knife, and he says, and the way the sun shot, like, was just reflecting off of it, it was so painful. He's almost trying to make it seem like this Arab was threatening him in any way by holding his knife up, and he's making it seem, even though he's saying it's the sun, what he's really saying is the knife, dude. He was holding up a knife.
Yes,
it was shining on my eyes, and all of a sudden, and what he's doing there is he's trying to justify the fact that I'm about to blast this dude away. Mm-hmm. I'm about to shoot him, and how am I going to justify that? It's the knife. He had a knife, and it was reflecting, and my eyes were burning, and then it's like, what?
Yeah.
It's like, no. Just trying to justify the fact that you had a gun, he had a knife, and you pulled the trigger.
I agree 100%. That's how I feel. But part 2 is where it gets crazy, and where our feeling here, I think, doesn't really register because, well, we'll get into it, but first of all, I just want to close that out. The silence of a beach where I'd been happy. I don't know if I can believe him. There was no indication of him being happy throughout the day. He was agitated, and then he was sort of content when he was with Marie, but that was it. And then firing 4 extra times at an already dead body, where it's like knocking 4 quick times on the door of unhappiness. But here's the thing. When we get to part 2, he's not unhappy. In jail, and even when he's on death row, he is not unhappy. Did he strike you as that? He's not. He's perfectly content, and that's why when we think that he's coming up with these excuses, and it sounds so reasonable to say that, he doesn't. We'll move into it, but he doesn't try and defend himself at all. He doesn't try and like stream the narrative the way that like it seems like he doesn't try and say like he had a knife. He doesn't try and say like any of that, and it's so bizarre. And this is where we can make the link to the essay that we read by Albert Camus, The Myth of Sisyphus, that he wrote right after this novel was published, deliberately to try and illuminate some of the philosophy in here. So say whatever you want to kick off part 2, but this is like the turn in this novel is like, it's why I said that we should read it, because like it stuck with me since senior year. It's so like you just can't make sense of it.
See, I think he was happy. I think when he pulled that the trigger the first time, and he says,
shattered the silence.
It shattered the harmony of the day, the exceptional silence of a beach where I'd been happy. I think he pulled that trigger, and he realized that he messed up. And he realized that life's going downhill. That, like, I'm not getting my way out of this. Or that it looks bad. Maybe he's not even sure if he's going to be guilty in court, but he knows this looks bad.
So
he takes a shot, he's in shock, and his first instinct is, whoa, if I didn't do that, life could be better. I think that's what he's thinking. And then when we see him in part 2, he's in jail. At this point, he's put his mask back on. At this point, he has re-entered the world of, well, now my world has changed. And I can't be thinking about that moment when I was in shock. I can't be thinking about those feelings, because that was just a moment of whatever. But I think for a moment, he realized there's good and there's bad. And what I did sucks. And what I had before this was pretty good, but I never really acknowledged that it was good.
I feel that. Except
it's a brief moment of shock. That's what I think.
Except in that moment, he wasn't done, because he shot 4 more times. If you really felt like that, wouldn't you drop the gun and like fall to the ground, hands in the air, like just assuming that you want to look as innocent as possible? But oh man, it's it's crazy.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right. The fact that he shoots 4 more times is pretty.
And they of course make a big deal about that in court, as we'll see. And he has no answer for it, really.
Well, it is a big deal. I mean, to shoot someone once is a terrible thing. To shoot someone 4 or 5 times, that you're making the duration of the violence drag out.
Yeah.
So you shoot someone once, you may have done a bad thing that lasted 2 seconds. You shoot someone 4 or 5 times, you're talking about maybe 10 seconds of you doing a very terrible act. And if you sit down and count 10 seconds to yourself, that's a long time. Before you just, like, if you count 10 seconds, that's a long time before you just kind of realize that this isn't good, I should stop.
Yeah. And he even actually makes a big deal of the fact that there was a quite pronounced hesitancy between the first and the second shot. And then he fires off shots 2 through 5 just sort of in succession. So it's like if he wants to go back to he had a knife, the sun was shining, my eyes, all that maybe could have been accomplished after 1 shot, but after 5, no. Where you pause between the first 2.
The hesitancy is almost worse on his case.
Because he's thinking about it.
I were to shoot and go boom, and immediately I go, whoa, hesitant. Boom, 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 boom. It's almost like I took a time to actually think about what I just did, and yet again I chose to keep shooting. It almost shows that, like, that the hesitance, by any means, that only makes his situation even worse, Definitely. In my opinion, because it shows that he actually had time to think about what he just did.
And as the guy's on the ground, totally defenseless at this point, and not at all a threat with his knife, which he probably dropped when he got shot the first time.
Yeah, he said, I shot 4 times at the motionless body.
Yeah. Oh, man.
The guy wasn't even moving.
So do you want to move through part 2 in the same sort of chapter by chapter way? Do we want to just pick out quotes and talk about the big themes and start to bring the myth of Sisyphus in now?
I think it'd be cool to bring the myth in and to we can talk about the myth and talk about exactly what Camus is saying here. And then from there, we could maybe say, and how does that relate to what happens next in The Stranger?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Okay. So I'll give a little background about the myth of Sisyphus first. So I'm pretty sure that it's a myth that Camus didn't come up with. I'm pretty sure Sisyphus was already a mythical half-god creature that people have talked about before. But what Camus did was write a story of the myth of Sisyphus that's not very long, probably about 2,000 words, and he talks about how Sisyphus ended up pushing the rock every day up to the top and watching it roll back down. But we read that little parable, but he also, I didn't have us read this because it would have been a lot of reading, but it actually came out in conjunction with a whole long essay called The Myth of Sisyphus. So he presented this, and then he sort of explicated in straight philosophy essay style what he means, what he means by this and what he means in The Stranger. But I think it's more interesting, rather than seeing exactly what he thinks, taking what we get from the essay in the book, because even just this little story about Sisyphus, he makes it pretty clear what he's talking about, and the connection to The Stranger is pretty straightforward. So,
and it reminds me of Jocko Willink too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Just carrying the rock up the mountain. Dude, literally, it's the exact same thing. I think Jocko got the rock up the mountain from the Sisyphus.
Oh no, he did it. He did it deliberately. Yeah. He loves Camus.
I didn't realize that until I read this, and I was like, dude, literally Jocko just stole all that.
Oh yeah, no, he literally just visually and with his voice told the myth of he just gave his take on the myth of Sisyphus. That's all it is.
All right.
Yeah, he's literally just push that rock and enjoy the pushing of it. You know what I live for?
Yeah, live to push the rock.
Yeah.
So much when you see it on top of the mountain. You're so disgusted and you push it back down to do it all over.
Because if it doesn't roll down on its own, I'd push it back down myself. All right, so like you said, I remember before we started recording, actually talking about this, you said accurately that part 2 was where the myth of Sisyphus really started to fit for you. So can you talk about what you meant by that a little bit?
Yeah.
Maybe let's talk about how Marchand is Sisyphus and how maybe he's not, because they do seem different to me in a little way. I mean, like okay, so let's start with the basics. Sisyphus is confined in hell with his rock. Marchand is confined in prison now, awaiting trial, and then eventually going through trial, and then being subject to capital punishment and waiting for months for that to happen.
There's no escape.
But what is Marchand's rock?
Well, I guess it would be... It's death, right? Marchand is thinking that... Like, okay, so Sisyphus pushes this rock up a mountain, and when he gets to the top, it's going to topple down. It won't stand on the mountain alone. And so it falls down, and Camus says, and at each of the moments, when he leaves the heights and gradually sinks towards the layers of the gods, who are the people who put him in hell, pushing this rock, he is superior to his fate. He is stronger than the rock.
Because he goes back down and willingly grabs it and starts to push again.
Willingly grabs it. So he has a sense of purpose in a way, but it's almost just, it's very physical. It's not emotional. I think, okay, here's a good comparison. At one point, part 2, Marchand even says that I no longer had the right to my emotions, is what he said.
Yeah.
He's put in jail, and he says, I no longer have the right to my emotions, which is funny because he never really cared about his emotions to begin with. So it's kind of funny to have a character that's like, oh, I don't have the right to my emotions anymore. But it's like, well, you never gave a shit about your emotions. Yeah. So like, why do you care? Yeah. Anyway, getting at is him and Sisyphus are in a very similar boat where they're going through a day-to-day experience where they're just physically reacting with the world on a physical level, not emotional, and they're just going through the motions of it, and they just okay. I don't know exactly what the rock is.
What
do you think?
Yeah, so I'll try to talk about it in a little bit of a roundabout way. I like what you said about how when he was in prison, he talked about how he was no longer allowed to really have his emotions and stuff. There was one line that struck out to me on page 64. It was when he was being questioned for, this is in The Stranger, when he was being questioned for one of the first times by the magistrate and stuff. And he says, on my way out, he kind of liked them. And he talks about how he likes them because they're like doing their job well. And they're like getting to the bottom of it and stuff. And it's like, he almost doesn't view himself as a criminal for a while. And he says, on my way out, I was even going to shake his hand. But just in time, I remembered that I had killed a man.
Yeah.
And then they start, of course, starting to build up the case against him and start to look at what is important about what's happened to him over the last few days. So they ask him basically straight out if he loved his mom. And he doesn't even have the wherewithal or self-concern or understanding of what is still coming down the line, that he is going to be put to death if he can't come up with a good defense of himself. And rather than just say, oh yeah, I loved my mom, he says, I probably did love mom, but that didn't mean anything. Because just like with Marie, he doesn't see love as anything important. So, page 70... Yeah.
And you gotta also think, I mean, the way he's being handled now, in custody, when he goes through trial, the way he's being treated is very similar to how he treats people, or how he treated people in part 1.
That's a good connection.
So you gotta think, I didn't have the right to my own emotions. Marie flat out said, I love you. And he said, whatever.
Yeah.
Like, she didn't have the right to her emotions in a way. It's almost like in order to be with Marcel, she had to put her emotions in the background. Almost to say, or to be with me, like, if you really want to be with me, you can be emotional or whatever, but really doesn't matter, you know? And a lot of the talk with his mom, a lot of it's coming down to social image, that idea of social image and how are you going to be perceived in society. And you can tell that the prosecutor really hits on, well, this man, he really hits hard the whole case. I mean, he even says, he has a great line, one like the last chapter.
Well, the defense attorney jumps up at one point and says, is a man on trial here for killing a man or for burying his mom? And it's kind of the same thing, actually, because the prosecutor, as you're saying, tries to really illuminate his character because it all feeds into why this happened.
There's a line. Yeah, I can't quite find it. I'll look for it, but
do you have the basic idea of it, what the prosecutor was saying?
It pretty much says that in trial, they talked little about my case or my crime and more about the death of my mother, and he couldn't quite see where.
Because he can't, because he can't quite see why a person's character would be relevant.
Can't see equality. Yeah, no, I mean, he absolutely just. Oh, here we go. In a way, they seem to be arguing the case as if it had nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
Everything was happening without my participation. My fate was being decided with anyone so much as asking my opinion. So that wasn't exactly what I was talking about. But
yeah.
It shows you his situation being in the courtroom and how he's being treated and how it's almost as if opinion or thought really doesn't matter, and you really see that what he's yearning for in this courtroom right now, what he wishes they would listen to, we never got as a reader. So, for example, Raymond asked him, "What's your opinion of me after hearing what I do to my girlfriend?" And he didn't have an opinion. He didn't have an opinion whatsoever. But now he's in the courtroom and he's saying, and they won't even ask my opinion. And a lot of what the case is the way they attack him is they really state, we're going to show you how you never acted. You never had an opinion before. You never had a sense of your emotions before, and if you had these things before, it may have prevented you from getting to this place. And once you're in court and you're being prosecuted against, your opinions, your emotions, that doesn't matter anymore.
Yeah.
Now it's all fact. So he's getting a taste of his own medicine big time here. He's really getting a taste of exactly everything he's been doing the whole book.
Absolutely. And what makes it even more stark, just to kind of put a fine point on that, I don't want to dig through and find the exact quote, but I think I got it. He's thinking it might be when the sentence is being debated, and he thinks, I'm wondering why no one is asking my opinion. I want to just jump up and give my opinion. But then he says, but then I realized that I don't have one. Like, he's like, I want to jump up and give an opinion, but I actually don't have one. I don't have any. Like, he's like, I feel like they should ask me, but I don't know what I'd say if they did ask me, because I actually don't care that much.
Yeah. He also says, during the summations by the prosecutor and my lawyer, there was a lot said about me, maybe more about me than about my crime. But were their two speeches so different after all? And that's a big question, where now he's starting to realize that it's more than just fact. It's more than just what happened. Even in a courtroom, you got to get a sense of who these people are, what made them lead up to what they did, what was their motive, why did they commit such a crime. And because he had no good morals or bad morals, because he had nothing that was preventing him from saying that this was a good idea or a bad idea, he completely fell in the mud, dude. He just slipped right in and just got submerged immediately. Just
right, because I guess what the court should be looking for is whether he feels remorse, whether he feels deeply torn apart by the fact that he made this mistake, and whether he's likely to do it again or not. But you can't get any sense of an answer to either of those questions because he doesn't portray anything about himself.
I think if you don't have a moral system about anything, then you're likely to do anything. I mean, would you trust someone who didn't have good or bad morals? It's hard. Could you?
No,
Could you trust them? And if you're in the jury and you're being asked, is this guy, can he be put back in society after what he did? There's nothing there saying that he's not going to do this again.
No, absolutely.
There's nothing there saying that this man should be out in the streets.
Definitely.
And it really goes all the way back to when he first started talking to Rain, but they even take it farther back to his mom, and how even the way you carry yourself in society, it really, social image is a big thing, because when it comes to the courtroom, they're going to try to create an image for you.
So if you don't have one to combat that with, then that's the one that will stick. All right, so I think let's just sort of lay it out there. What happens in the rest of the novel? He's in prison for a while. The trial takes a little while, and then eventually he's sentenced to death. He is sentenced to die by the guillotine, and this is where I think we can really try and talk about the similarities and the differences between him and Sisyphus. On page 76, he says, "When I was first imprisoned, the hardest thing was that my thoughts were still those of a free man." Which, of course, would be exactly what would hold Sisyphus back. If he had any hope of getting out of that situation, he would probably sit down and wait, rather than push the rock up and down again. But instead, he pushes it up and down again, and at the end it says, Camus writes, "I leave Sisyphus at the foot of the mountain. One always finds one's burden again, but Sisyphus teaches the higher fidelity that negates the gods and raises the rocks. He too concludes that all is well. This universe, henceforth, without a master, seems to him neither sterile nor futile. Each atom of that stone, each mineral flake of that night-filled mountain, in itself forms a world. The struggle itself toward the heights is enough to fill a man's heart. One must imagine Sisyphus happy." So
and he even says earlier in that essay, as he's given the punishment of pushing the rock, his scorn of the gods, his hatred of death, and his passion for life won him that unspeakable penalty in which the whole being is exerted toward accomplishing nothing. That is the price. This is the price that must be paid for the passions of this earth. So, as long as Sisyphus has the passions for life, as long as he is afraid of death and that he scorns the gods, if he still has that mentality, he's not going to be happy. That's his undoing. That's where he becomes miserable, is because he's thinking like a free man. He's thinking about all the good qualities and the privileges that a free man might have, you know. But when you fall into a situation where you don't have those privileges anymore, you really have to. There's a certain type of acceptance that you have to go through, and both him and Marchand are facing that same type of acceptance.
Absolutely. So I think that's a good passage to focus on, and we can relate it back to Marchand and talk about the differences between Sisyphus and Marchand here, because, and I have a slightly different take on it actually, and it comes a little bit from some of the essays that I read when I was originally writing about this as a senior. Scorn, that idea of scorn that you just read about, that was basically Camus' big idea, at least as much as I understand it. And to him, it was the solution. It was, he acknowledged that life is futile. We're all going to die. There is no God. There is no comfort. So all you can do is put one foot in front of the other enjoy what you can of fleeting passions in each moment and give a big fuck you to the gods, which is the scorn, which is the hate. And like that's Sisyphus is smiling and scornful of the gods. But I'm wondering, Marchand isn't scornful. He actually talks about numerous times, I'll try and find an actual quote, but he talks about how well the system is working and how flawlessly he is being nailed to the cross, and talks about sort of like what a good thing that is. He's like, oh, it's kind of nice that criminals like don't get away with criminal acts. Like, I'm just getting fucked left, right, and center, and that's pretty cool. And so like he doesn't have hatred for his fate. So I'm wondering what his connection to Sisyphus is.
I think he still does scorn the gods, though, right? I think the courtroom, now that you say that, that's more of like his rock, if you think about it.
Okay.
I think the court and that force, that's the force he's dealing with. That's the force he's pushing against. But in the end, Sisyphus learns to respect the rock and respect the job.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what Marchand is feeling as well, is like this respect for like the people who are condemning me in a way, or the people who are making miserable are his rock. But I think he's always scorned the gods, because at the end of the book, when he is going off on that priest, there is no sign whatsoever that this man does not scorn the gods. Like, he clearly has no place in his heart for religion, for anything along the lines of, repenting my sins and things like that. Like, he's clearly like, fuck that. What is that? Like, that doesn't mean a thing to me.
Yeah.
I mean, but he does. I don't think he has a passion for life. What's his passion for life? What is it? Like,
to feel.
What does he live for?
To feel okay from moment to moment, and that. So my question.
Okay.
So my question to you is, at the end, right before he's about to get his head rolling into the crowd, do you imagine him the same as Sisyphus, as being happy or content? Because that last chapter, other than like telling off the chaplain, he's like enjoying his time almost. Like the only time he doesn't like is the morning, because he knows that that's when they might come and tell him it's time to go get your head lopped off. So he sort of stays awake from late night to morning, but then after that he thinks, oh wow, I have another 24 hours, and he just kind of lays there. And he says that memory is this great thing, because like you can just go back, and he would like imagine his apartment and imagine everything in it, and like each day he could see more things. And he's like, I feel like if you've lived just one day, you can survive forever in prison, because you can just live off your memory, which is of course such a ridiculous notion, because you're not going to find any lasting happiness in memories. But for him, it doesn't matter, because, and actually this is the takeaway of the book, and this is like why I love it and why I think he's a fucking weirdo, but I think I'm like him, and you should strive to be like him, and you should be a stranger, and you should embrace the absurd of life, because death is at the end. We are all getting our head lopped off by that guillotine at the end. And so it actually doesn't, the goal isn't lasting happiness, because it won't last. And the future actually doesn't matter, because the future, you are dying in the future. That's what the future is. So each moment is what matters. And maybe he doesn't even embrace each moment enough, but he seems to understand that on like a very strange level. But I don't know if you can call that happiness or not, or if is it the best we got?
Well, I mean, I think so. Multiple things. I mean, I think like we had a talk before about happiness versus contentment, and how contentment is much easier achieved and more realistic. Happiness is very short lasting. It comes in much rarer moments, and the more we feel happy, it actually becomes more difficult to find things to make you happy. You have to work harder, because you already know what makes you happy. So if you do that too much, it's going to spoil to the point where it doesn't have the same effect on you as it did the first time. Anyway, I think that Marchand, he strives to find contentment. and not happiness.
Yeah.
And in that case, I agree with him, and I think that that is a strong mentality to have, and I think that that's smart. The idea that he's not striving for this happy life. But I can't say that I would that we should live like him, because we need to have more morals than that man has.
Oh yeah.
It's very crucial. I think when the priest comes into the book, a lot of people are taught morals through church. I mean, that's one thing that church was known for. That's one thing that I can say about myself. Like, people would always mention, how are you constantly nice? And it's because when I was young, I was taught what it means to be a good person, what a bad person is, by going to church. Now, whether or not that I still stand by those thoughts, no, I don't. I haven't been to church since I was 13. But
I was about to come at you with the knives.
What I'm saying is, however you find your own morals of right and wrong, you need to have them, because you have to be able to find yourself. If you're going to find yourself in a situation where harm is about to be done, or a situation where you're about to track through some mud, granted, there's mud in the world, but you should be smart in how you go about it. You shouldn't just track through the mud and go straight in thinking like you could just fall in a deep hole.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like,
you gotta chop down a tree and lay that shit down and walk over it.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I think it's about learning how to live with I think avoiding the fact that, let's say, mud is fear, mud is death, mud is everything in this world that makes you sad. It's learning how to live with mud in your world, not learning to avoid it. And I think Marchand just did a shitty job at avoiding the mud.
Yeah.
I think you got to find a way, not avoiding it, but to living with it. To live with it doesn't mean you have to be in it. You can have it in your world, but you don't have to be sitting in the mud. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's a good point. And on page 114, we're getting to the end here because the book is only 123 pages long, but on page 114, he says something that almost goes along exactly with what you're saying there. In the first half of this sentence, I'm like, yes, that's exactly what it's the Sisyphus attitude. It's exactly how you should feel. But then the second half, it's what I think differentiates Marchand from Sisyphus. So he says, so I'm going to die sooner than other people will, obviously. And that sounds almost like an acceptance. It's like, okay, you know what? I'm here just doing this until the end. But then he says, but everyone knows life isn't worth living. So that's like his cop-out. That's like his to me, he even talks a little sometimes about how in the morning, like, he'd hear people coming down, and he's basically like hyperventilating in his bed. He's like at the thought of that he's about to die. He's basically losing it. But he doesn't say it like that, but it's pretty obvious that he's very agitated, that like it's about to end, because he can have that tough attitude of embracing the absurd, which I think is a noble thing to do, embracing your rock and pushing it and knowing it's going to come back down and knowing that there's not much and eventually it's going to end. But then he tries to sort of either mask those emotions or pretend he doesn't have them by saying, but everyone knows life isn't worth living anyway. Like, okay, what? So the person just walked by your cell and today wasn't your day, so you decided to write that line. What if it was? What if he stopped at your thing? Would you say, oh, life isn't worth living anyway? Or would you say, Mammon, please help me? Like, that's what you would say. Like, when you're actually being led to the guillotine, nobody can just say life isn't worth living anyway, because you do not want to leave it behind.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think I was waiting for a moment where he was going to talk about his mom, and that some type of inner consolation was going to come out, but it never happened, and I think that's just because that's just who Marchand was. I mean, that part never happened, and I think it would have been a little more cliche if that happened.
No, I'm not saying he should have. I'm just saying, like, it's almost unbelievable that he has that attitude, because that's not, I just don't think it's possible for a human to feel like that.
For him to feel about the mom part,
No, to feel that life is meaningless when death is literally knocking on the door of your cell. Like he can try and be tough. He can try and say, I'm gonna die earlier than everyone. Like, that part is noble and that part is good, but like, you're hyperventilating at that point and you're fearful about.
I think it's like Sisyphus, dude. Like, he's not in a situation to even think about why life is worth living. I mean, Sisyphus is rolling a rock up a mountain. Whether or not, if he says, oh, life, the good life and living life, it's worth it. No, he's accepting the fact that this is where I am. I'm in prison. Whether life is worth living or not doesn't really matter. All that matters is, I'm just gonna push this rock. He's almost in a standstill point. Like, his freedom's been taken from him.
Yeah.
I think his freedom has been absolutely stripped away from him, Yeah, he's definitely losing it.
Yeah.
But I think, like, he can't be thinking, I think what that sentence says to me is that he just doesn't have the passions to live. Remember in that quote about the myth? Passions for life? I don't think Marcel ever had that.
Yeah.
I don't think he may have been content with life, but he never had passion for life. Like, to be okay, to feel okay, no one's passion is to feel okay. Passion drives you more than that.
Yeah, he never woke up excited.
No, he never woke up excited. Never did. His passion, if anything, it wasn't even sex. I was going to say it might have been sex, but not even that. Not even that, because even that, he would have married Marie for endless sex for like the rest of his life.
Exactly.
And that would have been something to hang on to. But even that, it was just, it is what it is. Whatever.
I agree. Let's read this last page right after the priest leaves, and then we'll talk about whether he finishes sort of in a situation more like Sisyphus, and whether we can imagine him happy or not, and whether this is a noble way to approach death and to think about the world. So, with him gone, I was able to calm down again. So that speaks to what I was saying about how he was hyperventilating. I was exhausted and threw myself on my bunk. I must have fallen asleep because I woke up with the stars in my face. Sounds of the countryside were drifting in. Smells of night, earth, and salt air were cooling my temples. The wondrous peace of that sleeping summer flowed through me like a tide. Then, in the dark hour before dawn, sirens blasted. They were announcing departures for a world that now and forever meant nothing to me. For the first time in a long time, I thought about Mammon. I felt as if I understood why at the end of her life she had taken a fiancé, why she had played at beginning again. Even there in that home where lives were fading out, evening was a kind of wistful respite. So close to death, Mammon must have felt free then and ready to live it all again. Nobody had the right to cry over her. And I felt ready to live it all again too, as if that blind rage had washed me clean, rid me of hope. For the first time in that night, alive with signs and stars, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world. Finding it so much like myself, so like a brother really, I felt that I had been happy and that I was happy again, for everything to be consummated, for me to feel less alone. I had only to wish that there would be a large crowd of spectators that day of my execution, and that they greet me with cries of hate. So that last line is maybe a discussion in and of itself, but the part that opens up to me is, I opened myself to the gentle indifference of the world, finding it so much like myself. That is like, to me, if nothing else, that's a useful attitude to adopt, because one thing that I think Camus is trying to tell us in both essays is we all are Marcel and we all are Sisyphus. We're all condemned men because we're walking this finite path where we're going to run into a brick wall studded with spikes and rusty hooks at the end and be ripped to pieces by the world. And he's saying, but you can't take offense to it. You can't think that the world has it out for you, or you can't get upset about that because the world is actually indifferent to you and doesn't care. It cares about you as much as it cares about that bird and as much as it cares about someone else. So basically, he's not saying this much, but I think the line off that isn't, I hope all these people come to my head lopping off and cry and hate with me, but actually make the most of what you can with each person in each moment, because your worth is directly equivalent to how much better you make their short time on this world. So I don't know if either of them say that, because Sisyphus is alone and he's alone, but...
And do you think that that's what Marchand was doing? Was he making the best of each moment with the people he was with?
No, that's why I'm saying that's the part he missed.
What if he was, though? Think about it. He didn't want to just turn his back to Raymond. Raymond was a shitty dude. And was Marchand just trying to make the best of the guy he was next to? By just being like, I don't really think of anything.
Yeah.
He kind of invited Raymond into his life. Marie, he's like, I don't want to think about love. And he might have been thinking, because that's going to complicate things.
Yeah.
Let's not complicate things right now. Let's just be ourselves and act the way we do. Maybe he was trying to live each moment. But this is where I think that this is where it kind of relates to my life in a way, dude. Like sometimes, like, you know, lately I've been looking at some people in my life that they want to live their lives and just go with it and just do whatever they want, right? But with every action, there are consequences in this world, you know? And that's where the court comes in. That's where the court and the stranger comes in, where if you're not acting without morals, if you don't have a set of morals, then if you try to just live and make the best of each moment, but you're not thinking about the consequences of what that might lead to for the future, it's not going to help you then. Now, then again, that's all based out of fear. That's all based out of, if we live too hard now, tomorrow it's not going to be pretty. But then again, what am I? I'm at that time, I'm just trying to prolong death. Is kind of what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
To really get to the core of it, I'm trying to prolong the fact that I'm going to die someday. But if you are going to die, why not just live the world to its fullest, but to live a life to its fullest?
Why not push that rock as hard as possible and push death as far away as possible?
Yeah. What if Sisyphus is saying, you know what, I'm going to keep pushing this rock and I'm going to get jacked.
Yeah. And
I'm going to get strong to the point where this is just me walking in my sleep, pushing this rock up the mountain. And I'm going to be so strong that I'm just going to stay alive, dude. I'm going to keep living because I'm enjoying it. Like, I think with Sisyphus, it almost seems like I accept the fact that this is my life and this is my fate and I will die doing this. Okay, let's get really good at pushing a rock up a mountain.
Yep.
That's kind of what I get out of it.
Yeah, it gets it.
So, I don't know.
No, keep going. I like that. But yeah, he's going to get so strong that he's going to go and beat the shit out of the gods and break free.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like...
It's almost the question, is false hope better than no hope? Like, in this world, like, do you, like, something to hold on to, even if you know that the door with the rusty hooks and the spikes is at the end, like, is it almost better to run at that door than to just, like, meander your way into it, not caring one way or the other?
My opinion is you gotta try to run at it the best way you possibly can and just see what happens. Except that death is always the fate. So you might as well just, like, train and learn how to take on a wall. Or I guess what Marchand is, you know, what I'm getting at is, like, you might as well try to have hope and to live life to the best of your ability instead of just saying fuck it and not try at all. because I don't know, the way I live, I feel like you got to set goals, you got to have hope. But most importantly, above all of that, I just want to rest my head at night and say I tried.
Yeah.
You know?
And then you're going to try again tomorrow.
All of that, I don't want to be like Marchand, where you walk into a courtroom and you're proving that you're guilty, and you sit there and you say, you know what? I never gave a shit.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm here. And that's why I'm here, because I never cared. And, like, a lot of times, like, I don't know, man. Like, you see it with, like, so many situations, whether it's, like, you know, like, some people don't care about school. So they're like, why do I care? Why should I try at school? Why should I get good at that? It's because you can get something out of it. That it can make tomorrow better, and you could try, and maybe you will get better. You will get better. You know, and maybe when you run at that wall, and that wall actually appears in front of you, maybe you'll have an idea of, like, how to go about it to the point where, okay, a wall is going to take me down someday, but today's not that day, because I'm going to conquer this wall. I'm going to push the rock up the mountain, and I'm going to get so good at it that it better be a big mountain that kills me. Like, to the point, you know what I'm saying?
I think that's perfect.
If you don't have any hope, if you're not trying, then you're going to let the little things kill you.
On that note, I think that's a great way to close it out. I think to anyone listening, if you haven't read The Stranger, go pick it up. It's a short read. You can read it almost in one sitting, basically. I mean, it's really not many words on each page, 123 pages total. It's more of a novella than anything. We'll be back next month with another novel. Do you have anything you want to add?
Keep pushing the rock.
Oh, yeah. Go read a book.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.